My mentor was moved into a care center. They sold her apartment and erased me from her will before I even knew she was gone. People talk about formative years like they only happen in childhood. But for me, they started in my late teens, when I met Ms. Danner. Back then, I was a lanky 17-year-old with headphones always around my neck and too much time alone after school. My mom worked the night shift at St. Francis Hospital in Trenton, New Jersey, and I mostly kept to myself. I wasn't a troublemaker. I just didn't have anywhere to be. That changed when I started wandering into the local museum. It was small, just a converted historical house near downtown, but it was quiet and warm and filled with things that looked like they had stories to tell. I must have shown up 3 times in 1 week before Ms. Danner finally asked if I needed help. "My name's Theo," I remember mumbling. "I just like walking through here." She smiled, soft but curious. "You walk like someone who's carrying something invisible. Come with me." That's how it started. Ms. Danner was a retired museum archivist who had once worked in D.C. at the Smithsonian, but she'd moved back home to care for her brother and somehow never left. She was older than most people I talked to, mid-60s, I guessed, but sharp and wry and carried herself like someone who learned a lot by staying quiet in rooms full of loud men. She started giving me small tasks: dusting display cases, logging donations, filing exhibit tags. She taught me how to document artifacts, but more than that, she taught me how to notice things. Like how scratches on a coin could tell you its journey, or how wear patterns on a quilt spoke of who made it and what they valued. Over time, she became more than just a mentor. She was grounding. While other kids were partying or figuring out college applications, I was helping her relabel Civil War memorabilia and listening to stories about her first archive job where half the staff didn't believe women should touch historical pieces. We'd sit in the back room with black gloves and bad instant coffee and talk about things that mattered, things I didn't talk about with anyone else. I told her things I hadn't said out loud before, how I hated going home to an empty apartment, how sometimes it felt like I was invisible. She never tried to fix me. Instead, she taught me quiet rituals to center myself. How to wrap a brittle document in muslin with patience. How to track my thoughts in a little leather-bound notebook she gave me. Sometimes, she said, you learn to survive by treating your mind like a precious artifact. Handle it with care. Years later, when I moved to New York to take a UX design job, we kept up weekend calls. Sunday afternoons, usually. She'd ask about subway stories and what I was designing. I'd ask what the museum needed and how her knees were holding up. But then the calls started changing. Missed ones. Shorter replies. Her niece answered once, said Ms. Danner was resting. Another time, she said they were managing her meds and that I'd caught her at a bad moment. Eventually, the call stopped entirely. When I asked, the niece would say things like, her health's fragile or she doesn't always remember who's who. I tried to believe her, but something about it didn't sit right. Ms. Danner was always lucid. Always specific. She remembered things. So why wouldn't she remember me? I didn't know it then, but something had already shifted. I just hadn't caught up to the loss yet. After a while, I stopped trying to schedule calls. I'd still text every week, a quick, thinking of you, or this photo reminded me of the time we found that mislabeled fossil. I never got a reply. At Christmas, I called again. This time her niece picked up, sounding annoyed. She's got bronchitis, she said flatly. She's staying with family for a bit, so it's not a great time. Which family? I asked. Can I drop something off? She's resting, she repeated. We'll let her know you called. I mailed her a card anyway, a photo of us in front of the museum's old piano, with a handwritten note and my new number just in case. It wasn't returned, but I never heard back. I figured maybe she really was sick. Maybe she needed space. I tried not to overthink it. Then in February, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Mrs. Hahn, one of the older museum volunteers. We weren't close, but she'd been around the same time I was. Hey Theo, the message read. Sorry to bother you, but do you know where Ms. Danner moved? I dropped by last week and her place is empty. New folks already moved in. No one at the museum's been able to reach her. I stared at the screen for a long time. Empty? I called her niece. She didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. Finally, I left a message. Hey, it's Theo. Can you please let me know what's going on with Ms. Danner? People are reaching out to me now. I just want to make sure she's okay. She texted back the next morning. She's in a care facility now. She needed a safer environment. Everything happened fast. It's for her own good. No name. No address. No explanation. I asked to visit. She ignored the question. I started calling local care homes around Trenton. I must have called 10 before I got the right one. They paused when I gave my name. I'm sorry, the receptionist said carefully. I can't confirm or deny whether Ms. Danner is here. You're not listed on her approved access list. But I'm her. I stopped. What was I? I wasn't family. Not by blood. Not legally. I understand, I said. Could you just let her know I'm trying to reach her? There was a pause. I'll pass along the message. That's all I can do. I hung up, heart thudding. The next day I tried again. Same response. After the third call, they told me they wouldn't be taking further inquiries without legal documentation. And that was it. A woman who helped shape me, who taught me how to survive myself, was suddenly cut off from me like I'd never existed. Her number didn't work anymore. Her apartment was gone. Her voice, the calm, steady voice that once reminded me I was capable of becoming something, had vanished behind locked doors and signed papers. I didn't know what they were hiding, but I knew something was deeply wrong, and I wasn't going to let it go. 2 weeks later, I stopped pretending this was something temporary. I took emergency leave from work, booked a flight to Trenton, and checked into a dingy hotel near the edge of town. The moment I dropped my suitcase, I called the care home again. This time, I didn't ask for permission. I told them I was coming in person. The receptionist sounded annoyed. "You're welcome to visit the front office, but again, if you're not on her list, we cannot permit entry or share any information." I went anyway. The care home was tucked between a strip mall and a church parking lot. The lobby smelled like antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. A young woman behind the desk greeted me with that polite, tight smile people reserve for lost causes. "I'm here to see Miss Danner," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked at her computer. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're not listed." "I know, but I flew in from New York. I just want to talk to someone. Please." She hesitated, then disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, a woman in scrubs came out. Her name tag said, "Rebecca, care supervisor." She didn't smile. "Ms. Danner passed away 2 weeks ago," she said. My throat closed. I hadn't expected that. Not like this. Not as a footnote. Not from a stranger in a hallway. 2 weeks. "She had a heart episode," Rebecca said gently. "It was peaceful. She'd been quiet in her final days." I couldn't speak. I think I just nodded. Rebecca watched me for a moment, then stepped back behind the counter. She returned with a cardboard box. "This was left behind with her personal effects," she said. "Her niece didn't want them. There are letters in here addressed to you." I took the box. My hands were shaking. Back at the hotel, I sat on the bed and opened it slowly. Inside were her reading glasses, worn down at the edges. A small pouch with a dried flower pressed into a ribbon bookmark from an exhibit we once worked on together. And a bundle of letters, tied with yellow string. Each one had my name on the envelope and her distinct, looping handwriting. I untied the string and started with the one on top. "Dear Theo, did I say something wrong? You haven't called in a while. I keep wondering if I made you uncomfortable. I hope I didn't. If I did, please know I never meant to. You're like family to me. More than that, really." The second one was shorter. "I've been feeling off. I don't always remember what day it is. Sometimes I wake up and the room is different. They say I'm in a temporary place, but I don't know who they are." The third. "I tried calling you, but my phone's gone. My niece said you didn't leave a number. That doesn't sound like you, but maybe I'm wrong." Each letter chipped away at me. Some were only a paragraph long. Others went on for pages, repeating things she had already written, asking the same questions in different ways. Every single one pulsed with the same aching thread: confusion, loneliness, the quiet dread of being forgotten by someone you thought would never forget you. "I miss our calls. I miss hearing you talk about the trains and the projects. I even miss hearing you laugh at my bad tea." By the fifth letter, I couldn't read anymore. My vision blurred. I sat there in that cramped hotel room, the box beside me, her voice echoing through ink and paper, and I felt like I had failed her. She thought I had walked away. She thought I had turned my back. And she died believing that. I curled up on the side of the bed, the last letter clutched in my hand, and I cried. I hadn't done that in years. Not since my mother's funeral. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up and read the rest. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. Someone had taken her away from me, and I was going to find out why. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood around her old apartment. The new tenants had already moved in, a young couple who looked startled when I stood too long on the sidewalk staring up at the windows. I didn't knock. I couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I crossed the street and knocked on the door of the duplex next to hers. It had always belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Harmon, who had lived there since before I met Miss Danner. To my surprise, Mr. Harmon still answered, cane in hand, his voice dry but familiar. "Theo," he said, squinting. "Well, I'll be damned. You look older." I told him what had happened, or at least, what little I knew. He nodded slowly, ushered me inside, and made a pot of tea. "She wasn't confused," he said, no hesitation. At least not when they moved her out. "She wasn't?" I asked, almost hoping I'd misheard. "No," he said again, firmer. "I saw her the day they came. 3 people showed up. Her niece, some guy in a polo shirt with a clipboard, and someone she called a caseworker, though she didn't seem to know him. She kept asking where she was going, if she'd be back by dinner. She called out your name. Said she needed to make a phone call." My stomach sank. "She asked for me?" I asked quietly. Mr. Harmon nodded. "Yeah, more than once. They told her she'd be back soon, just going somewhere to get looked after. But they took her things out with them. Furniture, boxes, everything. I left his house with a strange numbness hanging over me, like fog inside my ribs. That afternoon, I went to the county records office. It took less than an hour to pull up the transaction on her condo. Sold 3 months ago. Less than market value. No open listing, just a direct transfer. The buyer? Haverford Trust Real Estate Holdings. I searched the company name. It was one of those shell firms that owned a dozen small units across New Jersey. But digging deeper, I found something more disturbing. One of the officers on the firm's advisory board was married to Ms. Danner's niece. Coincidence? Maybe. But it didn't feel like one. Back in my hotel room, I pulled out an old flash drive Ms. Danner once gave me. She'd backed up notes and documents for some of our exhibits on it. I plugged it into my laptop, wondering if maybe, just maybe, there'd be something useful. Nothing directly about the sale, but there were folders filled with her annotated museum journals. I remembered those. She used to joke that they were her real legacy. And then I remembered something else. Ms. Danner once told me she had a will. She had shown it to me, years ago, when I was applying for scholarships and working nights. She wanted me to have her journals, and, if anything ever happened to her, a portion of her estate. I never thought I'd need to remember that detail, but now I did. I called the local estate attorney the next morning. "Hi," I said. "I think someone changed my mentor's will, and I want to know how, when, and why." Because I was done being shut out. I was going to peel back every layer until I found the truth. The lawyer's name was Mr. Callahan. Small office, Midtown Trenton, tucked between a dentist and a pizza place. He looked like he'd been doing estate law since fax machines were cutting edge. When I told him Ms. Danner's name, he raised his eyebrows. "Margaret Danner? I remember that will. She signed it here in person. Had it witnessed, notarized, the whole 9 yards. Do you still have a copy?" I asked. "I can't give it to you directly unless you're a named beneficiary. But I can tell you this, that will named you." I sat back, heart pounding. "She left you her personal library, including the museum journals, and a percentage of her estate. She said you were the closest thing she had to a son." I swallowed hard. "But that's not the will on file now, is it?" He shook his head. "No. A second will was filed 2 months before her death. This one was handled by a different lawyer, someone I've never met. And this new will removed you entirely." "Who did it name?" "2 distant relatives from out of state. And her niece as executor. There's a vague mention of continuing family lineage and honoring generational ties, but none of that sounds like Margaret. Not the woman I knew." "Can you contest it?" I asked. "Not without evidence," he said. "You'd need to show she was coerced or incapable of understanding what she was signing." So that became my new goal. I started collecting everything. I talked to the museum director, who said Ms. Danner had stopped replying to emails around the same time she was moved, after more than 20 years of near-weekly correspondence. I reached out to a retired physician friend of hers, Dr. Harold Lynn, who confirmed she had shown no signs of cognitive decline the last time they had lunch, just 5 weeks before her move. She knew what she wanted, he said over the phone. Her mind was sharp. She remembered my granddaughter's name and asked about my upcoming retirement party. If someone says otherwise, they're lying. I kept digging. I found copies of emails she'd forwarded to me over the years, all filed away in a separate folder in one of my old accounts. One thread was between her and a financial advisor, referencing how she wanted to set up a community trust in her will for educational programming at the museum. That clause? Nowhere in the new version. I talked to another neighbor who remembered boxes being removed before the movers arrived. They were in nice cars, she said. Didn't look like professional movers. More like people who already knew what they were taking. I wasn't sure yet if it was criminal, but it sure as hell wasn't innocent. And the more I found, the clearer the pattern became. They didn't just isolate her. They erased me. They pulled me out of her life with silence, confusion, and lies. They turned her final months into a locked room I wasn't allowed to enter. Then they rewrote the end of her story in their own handwriting, one that conveniently transferred her life's work and money into their own pockets. But I had something they didn't. I had memory. I had love. And now, I had receipts. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A week later, I drove back to the care facility. I wasn't sure what I expected, an apology, a loophole, maybe even a miracle. What I got instead was a quiet nurse named Janine, who met me outside during her smoke break after I mentioned Ms. Danner's name at the front desk. "She asked about you," Janine said, her voice low. "Almost every day at first. Said you used to call on Sundays. Asked if we could help her write a letter, but she didn't have your address. Eventually, she stopped asking. Did she seem confused?" Janine shook her head. "No. She was tired and sometimes upset, but she knew who she was. She knew what was happening." That sentence sat heavy in my chest. I told her what had happened, how I hadn't even known Ms. Danner had passed, how I'd been locked out of her life, how her will had been rewritten. Janine lit another cigarette, looked away toward the parking lot. They didn't let her have email. said she was too stressed. They limited her visitors. Even the museum folks were turned away after a while. It wasn't the place's policy, it was the niece. Back in my hotel room, I pulled open Ms. Danner's old email archive. I'd kept access from the time I helped her troubleshoot her account years ago, and she'd never changed the password. I didn't feel guilty. Inside, I found the folder marked Drafts. I clicked through slowly. There were at least 24 unsent emails to me. Most were short. Theo, I miss you. I keep thinking I did something wrong. Are you still in New York? I think about you every time I see a train in a movie. Some were longer, more rambling. They tell me you stopped calling, but I don't believe them. I know how careful you are. Maybe I forgot something. Maybe I offended you. I'm sorry if I did. I read every one. Then I cried again. And then I got to work. I built a simple memorial website that night. Just her name, a photo, and a few scanned pages from her old journals. I left the comment section open. Within 3 days, it filled up. Former coworkers, museum volunteers, a retired librarian named Greta, all wrote to say they had no idea she'd passed. Many had tried to visit her or send cards, but were told she had moved abroad. Some mentioned being turned away at her old apartment. She called me once, Greta wrote. She sounded scared. She said she didn't understand why no one came anymore. She cried when I told her I'd always cared. It wasn't just me. They'd pushed everyone out. I started collecting those messages, screenshotting them, cataloging them by date and sender. This wasn't about just one person being shut out. This was systematic isolation. They'd buried her voice before she died. Hid in closed doors and fake stories, told in calm tones to cover up a cruel truth, that they made her feel abandoned so no one would question what came next. But now her voice was back. It was in the letters, in the emails, in the people she had touched, and now in me. She was not gone quietly, and I wasn't going to let them pretend she had been. It was a retired accountant who gave me the next piece of the puzzle. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez, and she'd handled Ms. Danner's taxes for nearly 2 decades. I tracked her down through an old contact form buried on a local business registry. When I called, she remembered me right away. Oh yes, she said. The museum boy. She was always talking about you. We met at a small bakery she liked near the river. She wore 2 gold bracelets and spoke with no wasted words. I can't share everything, she said, but I can tell you that in the final year of her life, the financial activity on her accounts changed drastically. How so? There were withdrawals, lots of them. Labeled as family reimbursements, but they weren't consistent with her usual patterns. Thousands at a time, over several months. And the spending didn't align with her care facility fees. Something wasn't right. I asked if she could share copies. She hesitated, then finally nodded. I'll send them. I kept backup records. She was old school like that. Told me to document everything like I'd have to defend it in court. Guess she knew more than she let on. I thanked her and left with a knot in my stomach. The next day, I hired a forensic auditor. Cost me more than a few paychecks, but it was worth it. I gave them everything, the bank statements, sale records, old emails, even the scanned pages from her notebooks where she'd scribbled notes about account passwords and reminders. Within 2 weeks, I had confirmation. Funds had been drained steadily in the months following her move, funneled through joint accounts opened just before she was relocated. The beneficiaries? Her niece and one of the distant relatives named in the new will. The money was used for personal expenses, a new SUV, home remodeling, luxury purchases. It wasn't even subtle. They didn't expect anyone to check. I went back to the care home one more time. This time I wasn't asking for anything. I just sat down in the visitor's lounge and waited for Janine, the nurse who had spoken to me before. She recognized me instantly. She asked to call you, she said, sitting across from me. More than once. We'd tell her she didn't have a working number, or that she should rest. But some of us knew. We just couldn't do much. Did she ever write anything down? Janine looked around, then pulled a small key from her pocket. There's a locker in the staff room. We found it after she passed. Nobody claimed it, so I kept it aside. There's a journal inside. That night, I opened it slowly, alone in my hotel room. The entries were dated, careful. Her handwriting still strong, though shakier in the later pages. March 14th, they said Theo stopped calling. I don't understand. He wouldn't. Did I say something wrong? April 2nd, they sold the house. They said I needed better care, but no one asked me. May 5th, I asked for my letters. They say they're lost. I remember writing them. I remember waiting. June 18th, I think I'm being punished for something. I can't remember what. July 9th, I miss the museum. I miss the quiet of glass cases and dusty light. I miss being seen. July 28th, I am not confused. I am not lost. I am still me. That last entry stopped me cold. She knew. Even as the world closed around her, even as the people she trusted stripped away her voice and dignity, she still knew. I sat with that journal on my lap until sunrise. And by morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. They wanted to erase her, but she had left behind the truth. In emails, in ledgers, in the heart of every person who ever mattered to her. And now, in writing, her own, undeniable voice. It was time for the world to hear it. Mr. Callahan didn't hesitate when I told him what I'd found. "You've got more than enough," he said. "Between the journal, the financials, the old will, and the statements from her nurse and neighbors, we can challenge the revised will in probate court." So we filed the petition the next day. The official grounds: undue influence, will tampering, and suspected elder exploitation. What I didn't expect was how quickly the community got involved. Word spread through the memorial website. People who'd worked with Ms. Danner, people who'd studied under her, folks from the museum, former volunteers, even old neighbors, they started showing up with their own stories, emails, photos. Some wrote statements. Others reached out to journalists. By the end of the week, a local reporter from the Trenton Herald reached out. "We're working on a piece about elder erasure," she said, "and this story, her story, needs to be heard." I wasn't sure at first. But then I remembered that last line in her journal: "I am not confused. I am not lost. I am still me." She wanted to be seen. So I let the reporter in. The piece dropped 2 days before the hearing. The archivist forgotten. How a beloved museum mentor was silenced in her final days. It went viral locally. The care home's inbox flooded with emails. The realty company was suddenly very interested in clarifying their role. But what mattered most was that it gave her a voice in a place she'd been denied one. Court was scheduled for the following Monday. That morning, I walked in with Mr. Callahan, a thick binder in my hands, filled with journal scans, affidavits, financial records, and email printouts. Across the aisle sat her niece and 2 other family members I barely recognized. The niece wore a tight black dress and sunglasses and sighed, like grief was a fashion accessory. The judge was calm, older, sharp-eyed. "Mr. Callahan laid it out plainly. The original will, the abrupt shift in beneficiaries, the financial trail, the restricted access, the community shutout. Then something I hadn't expected happened. During cross-examination, one of the distant cousins cracked. "I didn't want to sign anything," she said, hands trembling. "But she told me Margaret wouldn't know the difference. Said it was all technical. I didn't think. I didn't know what we were doing was wrong." A beat of silence followed. The judge leaned forward. "So you admit you were coerced?" She nodded slowly, tearfully. "Yes." The judge paused, tapping his pen. "I'm placing an immediate freeze on the estate," he said. "This matter requires further review. But based on the evidence presented, including the journal and corroborated witness testimony, the court sees strong merit in your petition. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for a full hearing." Her niece stood up mid-session, whispering furiously with her lawyer. But it was too late. The court had heard enough. The truth was no longer hidden behind paperwork and polite lies. It was spoken aloud on the record in the very place where silence used to win. And this time, silence had lost. The final probate hearing was quiet. No cameras, no press. Just a modest courtroom in Mercer County with scuffed floors and old wood paneling. But for me, it felt like a cathedral. The judge reviewed everything again: the forensic report, the journal entries, the testimony, even the memorial site printouts. Mr. Callahan was surgical in his delivery, every document indexed and cross-referenced. Her niece's lawyer looked like he was already planning his next job. When the judge finally spoke, it was with deliberate, measured words. "This court finds substantial evidence that the revised will was procured through undue influence, and that the decedent, Margaret Danner, was not given fair representation of her intentions at the time it was signed. The original will, filed in 2018, is hereby reinstated." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. The judge continued. "Furthermore, based on the documented financial exploitation presented by the petitioner and the forensic auditor, all parties who benefited from these unlawful transfers are to be barred from future estate management roles and are ordered to repay the estate for all unjust enrichment. The estate will be held in trust until restitution is made." The niece's face fell pale and stunned like someone who had been slapped in a room full of strangers. One of the cousins just started crying. I didn't smile. It wasn't about revenge. It was about her. Her journals, her legacy, her memory. And now it was safe. After the hearing, the museum director met me in the courthouse lobby. He had been following the case quietly, offering moral support. "We've been talking," he said. "There's a local nonprofit that focuses on preserving small-town history. They want to help us build an exhibit in her name, Margaret Danner, the woman behind the glass." I swallowed hard. That's incredible. They want you involved. Her journals, her photos, her curations, all of it. They said the way you fought for her, that's part of the story now too. Later that week, I met with the nonprofit board. They offered to co-sponsor a permanent archive room and an educational trust under her name. Part of the original will had already earmarked funds for educational use. With the ruling in place, that money would go where she intended all along. I accepted. And I donated every last page of her annotated journals, not as relics, but as a foundation. She had always said stories needed a place to live. Now they had one. When I visited the care home one final time to collect her belongings, Janine handed me the small reading glasses and the flower bookmark again. "We've been following it," she said softly. A few of the staff cried when they read the article. "Thank you for not letting her disappear." "She was never meant to," I said. And as I left the building, the weight I'd been carrying, grief, guilt, rage, the long, bitter silence, felt just a little lighter. Because she hadn't just been remembered. She'd been vindicated. And now, so had I. It was early spring when I visited her grave again. The ground was soft, the grass still patchy from winter, but the new plaque gleamed in the sunlight. Margaret Danner, 1951 to 2024. Archivist, educator, friend. Preserved by love, not forgotten by silence. Beneath the name, etched in small print, was the museum emblem, a symbol she'd worn around her neck on a bronze pin for most of the years I knew her. It felt right. Quiet. Precise. Like her. I sat beside the headstone for a while, knees in the dirt, just talking to her like I used to on the phone. "I hope you'd be okay with all this," I said. "The exhibit opens next month. Your name's on everything." They even used your original classification notes for the layout. A breeze passed through the trees. I like to think it was her answer. A few weeks later, the exhibit launched. It was called Through Her Hands, The Quiet Legacy of Margaret Danner. The main room had pale lighting, glass cases, handwritten notes enlarged on panels. Photos of her working with students, filing papers, giving tours. The museum had spared no detail. Even the flower bookmark had its own small display, titled, "Gift, Given Twice." At the entrance, a bronze plaque greeted every visitor. This archive is dedicated to the life and work of Margaret Danner, preserved by those who refuse to forget. A voice silenced too soon, but never truly gone. The first day, over 100 people came. Some were old friends. Others were strangers. One woman, a college student from Rutgers, told me she'd read about Ms. Danner in the article and wanted to see what kind of woman had inspired someone to fight that hard. "She must have been incredible," she said. "She was," I said. That afternoon, I stepped back from the crowd. People moved from exhibit to exhibit, reading, pausing, listening to her voice and audio clips we'd recovered from old tours. And for the first time, I didn't feel like something had been stolen from me. I felt like something had been returned. She wasn't just a name in an obituary. She wasn't just a woman who died quietly in a care home while the world looked away. She was someone who changed lives, mine, and so many others. As the last visitor left and the lights dimmed to their evening glow, I stood in the center of the archive and let the quiet settle around me. This was her garden now. Not of flowers, but of memory, of truth, of pages that no one could rip out or rewrite. And even though she was gone, her voice, soft, firm, enduring, would keep speaking through the story she helped me tell. That's how you preserve a life. Not just with love, but with proof.